I never trusted the quiet ones. Ships, I mean. A vessel this size, 3 decks tall, cargo hauler with a crew of at least 30 shouldn't drift without a voice. Even wrecks have voices. The groan of pressurized seals, the hiss of dead hydraulics, the mournful creak of warped girders. But this one was waiting. The station's docking clamps latched onto the freighter with a shudder that rattled through my bones. A dying animal being hauled into the butcher's light. Through the viewport I saw its hull, black with burns, scarred from micro-impacts, panels sheared off like skin flayed down to muscle. It wasn't just damage. It looked deliberate, surgical. I was the first to cross. The others joked over comms, something about first pick of salvage rights. But it sounded thin, like voices forced through clenched teeth. My boots hit the freighter's deck with a muted crunch. Frost. A fine white sheet, undisturbed for years, maybe decades. Yet my breath fogged thicker than it should. The air was stale, too heavy. I adjusted my filters. No change. The breach behind us sealed with a clang, and the sound echoed like a gunshot. For a moment I thought it was final, that we were already locked inside. We flicked on lights. Bright cones sliced through corridors ribbed with torn pipes. Condensation dripped in slow intervals, rhythmic like the ship was sweating. Every drop carried too much weight in the silence. Our beams caught glints along the walls, rivulets of moisture tracing lines, curving patterns that didn't look random. More like veins, radiation's clean, Sparks muttered, his scanner whining low. Power's dead. The statement hung there. Power was dead, yet we all heard it. The faint hum in the steel, the groan that wasn't ours. Metal doesn't breathe. Ships don't exhale, but I swear I felt it on my neck. A low, steady draft, warm against the cold. We moved in formation. Reyes took rear. Sparks walked ahead of me. I logged every detail, every inconsistency, trying to bury the unease beneath protocol. The mess hall was our first stop. I shouldn't call it that. Mess implies something alive. The room was a grave. Plates set out, food petrified into brittle slabs. The seats were bolted, but one had been dragged back, facing away from the table. Toward the wall. The frost there was different. Melted, refrozen as if someone had leaned their head against it for hours. I crouched. My visor fogged, and for a second I thought I saw a reflection, not mine. Someone's face, lips moving slow, syllables caught in ice. I blinked and it was gone. We powered the hall's overheads. Light flickered, staggered, then caught. The shadows it cast were longer than they should have been. Stretched like tendons pulled too tight. Sparks swore under his breath. Reyes told him to shut it. Neither of us laughed. Every corridor deeper bled the same way. Frost and silence. But the smell, metal and rot, thickened. It wasn't decomposition. It was chemical, industrial, yet wrong. Like rust soaked in spoiled meat. I tasted it in the filters. We reached the central lift. The doors were pried open, bent outward. Inside, darkness and something else. The shaft wasn't empty. The walls were coated with a substance halfway between corrosion and growth. Black, glossy branching. It pulsed when our light struck it. Only once, but enough, Reyes muttered. Not natural. Not shipboard. My stomach tightened. She was right. The freighter wasn't just damaged. It had been infiltrated. We turned back. I told myself it was to regroup, but the truth was simpler. I wanted out. My skin crawled under the suit, every pore screaming retreat. We made it halfway to the breach when the ship decided. The airlock sealed. Not a glitch. Not a slow grind. It slammed shut with a finality that made my teeth ache. The red light over the hatch bled across the corridor. Sealed from the inside. Sparks yanked at controls, pounded the panel. No response. Reyes checked comms. Static. Our own station's signal drowned beneath a low hiss like someone exhaling directly into the mic. I tried to call back, but all I heard was my own voice, delayed by half a second. Captain. Reyes' voice was low, almost reverent. She pointed at the bulkhead. The walls were wet. Not condensation anymore. Wet like a wound. The frost melted in lines that curved inward, converging toward the center of the ship, veins feeding something deeper. The hum beneath the deck rose, a frequency more felt than heard. My molars vibrated. My heart stumbled in rhythm with it. I gripped the railing, nails digging into gloves, trying to think past instinct. Salvage law, mission protocol, survival. All meaningless words rattling in my skull. This wasn't a freighter anymore. It was a husk. Something had filled it. I ordered us deeper. Not because I believed in finding answers, but because going forward was the only direction left. The airlock had made that decision for us. We passed through junction after junction. Lights refused to stay steady, blinking like dying eyes. My reflection followed me in every viewport, but it lagged as though the glass remembered me too late. Once I swear it smiled before I did. Sparks muttered coordinates to himself. Reyes kept her hand near her sidearm. I kept walking, boots sinking into frost that grew thicker, softer, like it wanted to hold me in place. Every step carried us closer to the center. Closer to the heartbeat. It was faint, buried under steel and silence, but it was there. Thump. A pause. Thump. Not the rhythm of engines. The rhythm of something waiting to be born. I stopped. My visor fogged, though my filters were clear. A thought surfaced unbidden, sharp as ice. We aren't the first. The plate's in the mess. The seat turned to the wall. The frost melted where someone had waited, pressed against the steel. They'd heard the same hum, the same breath, and they hadn't left. Captain? Sparks's voice cracked. I wanted to lie, to tell him we'd make it out, that this was salvage, nothing more. But the hum shook the walls again, and the frost beneath us cracked in hairline veins. I swallowed the truth like poison. We keep moving, I said. My voice was steady, though my hands trembled. We find logs. Then we find a way out. But even as I said it, the realization spread through me like cold water. There was no way out. The ship wasn't drifting. It was waiting. And as the heartbeat grew louder, pressing against the bulkheads, I swore it was waiting for us. That's when the air behind us shifted. Not a sound, not a breath, a wait. As though something had stepped into the corridor and was standing just beyond the edge of our lights. We froze. Sparks' scanner whined, climbing higher, glitching. Reyes raised her weapon. My throat closed. I forced myself to turn, light trembling across the corridor. Nothing there. Just frost. Just silence. And then, so soft it could have been memory, the frost beneath my boots pulsed. Once. Twice. A slow echo of a heartbeat, answering my own. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The ship was alive, and it had sealed us inside. The corridors felt too narrow for a ship this size. Haulers were built wide, made to move bodies and freight in bulk, not squeeze them like marrow through a bone. Yet every step we took pressed the walls closer, as if the metal itself inhaled around us. Our flashlights cut long, shaky beams through frost-lined passageways. Bulkheads twisted where they should have been straight, curved like ribs bent out of place. Condensation ran down them in threads, dripping in a rhythm that wasn't mechanical. It was slower, patient. The ship was dead. The readouts confirmed it. No power, no life support, no engines. But the hum was there, constant, faint, like a low chord vibrating through the marrow of the hull. Not sound so much as pressure in the teeth. Sparks ran a glove across one wall. Metal doesn't creak like this unless something's moving inside it. His scanner gave nothing. But still, we all heard it. The subtle give, the long sigh of stressed steel. The others laughed. Too quickly. The kind of laughter that tries to strangle panic in its crib. Their voices bounced back in fragments, overlapping like a choir that wasn't ours. I didn't laugh. I stayed behind at a terminal. Frost coated the screen in thick rime. I wiped it away with my sleeve, fingers shaking harder than I wanted them to. The glass stuttered alive, not data, not logs, just words, fragmented, jittering, like a mouth choking between syllables. Don't look at it too long, I blinked. The screen was black again, just my reflection staring back at me. Captain, Reyes called from down the corridor. I snapped the terminal off and lied with my voice. Nothing here. But my chest had tightened and I couldn't shake the weight of those words. My breath fogged thicker inside the helmet, hotter, as if the ship had leaned closer, whispering against the glass, watching me. We reached the mess hall. I recognized it before we entered, same layout as ours, just older, dirtier. It should have been comforting. Familiar. Instead, it was obscene, like a mirror that showed a corpse instead of your face. Plates were still set, the meals fossilized in mid-bite. Forks rested where hands had dropped them. Even mugs sat half-raised, frozen in place by frost. Only one chair was different. Pulled back from the table. Turned away. Facing the corner, no one sat there. No one had for a long time. But the frost against the wall bore the faint, melted impression of something that once leaned close, forehead pressed, as if in prayer. Reyes cursed under her breath. Sparks muttered something about ritual. I said nothing. We powered the hall lights. They coughed, flickered, then caught, and the shadows grew too long. They stretched from every plate, every fork, every seat. They crawled across the walls, bending wrong as if gravity had shifted sideways in the dark. The shadows reached toward that corner chair, twisting toward it like vines. I tried not to look, but it felt like if I didn't, something behind me would. Sparks broke the silence. "Captain, this place—" He didn't finish, because that's when we heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Above us. Soft. Deliberate. Footsteps. Someone, or something, was walking in the ceiling ducts. The three of us froze, flashlights stabbing upward into steel plating that revealed nothing but rivets and frost. Another step. Slow. Heavy. The metal groaned with its weight. I raised my hand, signaling silence, but my heart pounded so hard I thought it would betray me. Reyes's light trembled, scattering across bulkheads. Sparks's scanner chirped, once then failed, the display fracturing into nonsense symbols. The steps paused, directly above us. The air grew warmer. Not much, just enough to fog my visor in a second layer of condensation. My ears popped like pressure had shifted. I whispered, "Don't move," but Sparks, trembling, craned his head up. Eyes wide, the duct above him dented inward. We staggered back as a long groan rattled through the ceiling, frost falling like dust. My throat locked, lungs refusing to take in air, and then silence. The weight lifted. The sound was gone, nothing above but cold steel and frost. Reyes raised her sidearm. "There's something alive in here. Alive." The word felt wrong. It wasn't life. Not as we knew it. I told myself we were still in control, that this was still salvage. But the truth scraped at my skull like broken glass. We weren't explorers here. We were prey, and the ducks were hunting us. We followed the sound. Every step thundered in the hollow shell of the freighter. The ducks carried it, warped it, turned our boots into cannon fire. Sparks moved ahead of us, his breathing ragged through comms, a tremor under every word. He reached the nearest vent, pried it open with his crowbar, and pulled himself inside. The metal groaned in protest, as if the ship itself resented his weight. Then, stillness. We waited. His light flickered once inside the shaft, bright against frost-slick walls, then disappeared around a bend. Swallowed. Seconds stretched into rope, coiled tighter with every tick of silence. His breathing crackled loud at first, frantic and unsteady, bouncing between static bursts. Then it cut short. The silence that followed was worse than screams. A crash reverberated from deep in the ducts. Then his voice, raw, tearing from his throat. One scream, jagged and final, static devoured it, and then nothing. I froze. Reyes cursed, low and sharp, weapon raised toward the vent. I couldn't leave him. I couldn't leave anyone in this ship. Not yet. I pulled myself into the duct. The metal scraped my suit as I crawled forward. My knees and palms screamed against cold steel. Each movement amplified like I was dragging myself through a drum. The stench hit me halfway in, rust layered with something wetter, sour. Not oil, not blood. Both. I flicked my light forward. The beam trembled with my hands, the walls shifted under it, handprints. Hundreds of them, pressed into the metal itself, warped into its surface as though the alloy had been clay. Fingers splayed wide, some long, some small, overlapping like fossils frozen mid-panic. Each was sunk deep, impossibly deep. No glove, no human strength could have done this. I touched one with gloved fingertips. It was warm, my chest tightened. My ears rang, though the comms were dead silent. Whispers threaded the static, too faint to form words, yet sharp enough to pierce marrow. 1,000 voices, or one voice 1,000 times. I moved faster, knees slamming the duct floor. My light flicked across the walls, searching, chasing some shape that wouldn't hold still. The whispers thickened, swelling until it felt like the duct itself was speaking. I reached the bend. Sparks' flashlight lay there, crushed in on itself, bent inward, not broken by a fall but collapsed by pressure, as if a fist the size of a ribcage had closed around it. The beam still sputtered faintly, flickering against the walls in a rhythm too close to breathing. Sparks was gone. Only the dripping remained. A slow wet tap that echoed down metal corridors. The sound of something feeding. I stared at the light. My mind stalled, refusing to choose. Go forward, turn back? Either way, the duct narrowed behind me and my skin prickled with the knowledge I was already being followed. I turned, dragging myself back. My light swung wide and froze, because there, less than a meter away, crouched in the dark, was a face. My face. Identical. The light caught it too clearly. Same jaw, same eyes, same streak of frost on the cheek plate. It didn't blink. It only stared, lips half-parted, breath fogging the duct. My lungs locked. It leaned forward, slowly, carefully, like a predator savoring recognition. My hands scrambled backward, palms slipping on frost. I choked out Sparks's name, then Rhea's, but the comms only spat static, warped into my own voice, repeated back at me half a second too late. The other me tilted its head, an unnatural angle, too sharp. Its smile twitched wrong, as if stitched from muscle memory but not understanding why. I crawled backward, desperate, light shaking. Its eyes reflected the beam, empty, wet, metallic, and then it moved. Not crawling. Not walking. Sliding as if pulled forward by the duct itself. The whispers rose into a scream that wasn't sound but pressure, pounding in my skull. I shut my eyes, teeth grinding until blood filled my mouth. When I opened them again, the duct was empty. No face. Only my own reflection trembling in the beam of Sparks' broken light. But the smell was stronger. Copper and rot hot against the filters. The dripping hadn't stopped. It was closer now. Much closer. We argued in the galley. It felt obscene to raise our voices there. The place still bore the outlines of a crew who had once lived, eaten, and joked in those same seats. Plates fossilized into brittle shapes still cluttered the tables. Forks sat mid-bite. Every shadow stretched longer than it should, as though listening. Protocol said we cut losses, marked the ship derelict, and left. But Protocol had never had Sparks. Sparks was family. He'd carried us through hull breaches and failed thrusters, patched us through storms that would have shredded lesser crews. He was gone now, but not gone. I couldn't abandon him to silence, Reyes disagreed. Her voice was clipped, too sharp, too fast. Captain, he's dead. Whatever's in this ship took him, and it'll take us if we don't. I cut her off, not with words, but with silence. The kind that leaves no room for argument. I told myself it was authority, but the truth was guilt. Guilt so heavy it bent me forward in my seat. We tracked the heat signatures. Erratic, pulsing where no power should exist. They led us to the reactor. The doors resisted, then slid open with a slow, wet scrape. The air that rushed out hit like a wave, dense, humid, carrying a stench that clung to filters. Copper and rot, thick enough to taste. Inside, the air shimmered, fluid in its density. Lights refracted like they were bending through water. My visor fogged with sweat. The core wasn't metal anymore. Coils of black tissue wrapped it, fused into the machinery, stretched taut like tendons straining against bone. The steel beneath was gone, or worse, digested. The whole reactor pulsed, expanding and contracting with obscene regularity. A lung, breathing, feeding. Reyes muttered a prayer under her breath, her voice cracking, and then we saw him. Sparks, or what remained of him. He was part of the wall, fused where metal met tissue. His chest and shoulders protruded from the slick surface, eyes wide, skin pale, lips moving in a silent loop. Pleading. My knees locked. I should have moved to him, should have pulled him free, but my body failed. He was close enough to touch, but I stayed rooted in place like the ship had pinned me with its gaze. Reyes stepped forward, weapon raised. It's not him anymore. I wanted to shout to stop her, but I couldn't. My throat was stone. She lined her sights. Sparks' chest split open before she fired. A wet crack, sharp enough to snap through bone and steel alike. His torso peeled back in a spray of steam and gore. Tendrils lashed out, black and glistening, moving too fast for thought. They wrapped Reyes in seconds, piercing through her suit, hooking into flesh. She screamed, but the sound warped, torn apart by static across our comms. Blood sprayed against my visor in a hot crimson arc. I froze. Useless. Every instinct screamed to pull her back, to cut her free, to do something. Instead, I stood there as she was dragged toward the core, arms thrashing, helmet cracking against the wall. Her eyes found mine through the glass. Terror, fury, betrayal all at once. The tendrils pulled harder. Her scream cut off as her jaw snapped wide. The sound that followed wasn't hers anymore. It was the ship's. A groan deep as a reactor detonation vibrating through the walls, shaking the frost loose from every pipe. The core throbbed louder, the tissue expanding, contracting, gulping down her blood like oxygen. I stumbled back, chest heaving, visor smeared with her. My hands shook against my weapon, but I couldn't lift it. Couldn't fire. To fire would have been to admit I'd already lost them both. The tendrils retreated into the core, dragging her with them, leaving only sparks half embedded in the wall, chest cavity still yawning wide. And then he whispered my name, not over comms, not through any speaker. His lips fused to the wall, shaped it. A breathless rasp impossibly clear slicing through the hum. "Captain." The reactor lights dimmed, pulsing with the rhythm of his voice. I staggered backward, bile rising. My legs found the corridor before my mind caught up. The door slid shut behind me with a hiss, but the echo of that whisper clung to my skull. My name. From sparks, from inside the wall. We split. It was a mistake and I knew it, but desperation eats reason first. Reyes was gone. Sparks was gone. The reactor throbbed like a living wound in the heart of the freighter. And if it consumed the core, it would consume us. If any of us were left to consume. So we split. Me into the lower decks, the others scattering into the maze above. Our voices fractured over comms, fading to static as soon as the walls bent between us. Alone, I told myself it was tactical, efficient. But the truth pressed cold against my spine. Alone was safer. If they died, I wouldn't have to watch. Every step echoed too loud, rattling up the ducts and pipes, bouncing back heavier. As though the ship wasn't just carrying sound, but adding to it, feeding it back with weight. My boots scuffed frost that glittered in my light, each grain like powdered bone. The lower deck opened into a cargo bay, massive, vaulted, ribbed like a cathedral hollowed out by worshippers who had never been human. The scale pressed down on me until I felt smaller than a child, smaller than dust. I stopped breathing. The walls weren't steel anymore. They hadn't been for a long time. The plating curved into archways, slick with sheen, pulsing faintly in time with some buried rhythm. Veins glowed under the surface, pale bioluminescence worming across like constellations turned inside out. Each pulse throbbed, slow, steady, and obscene. I moved inside. My light swept across the chamber and the walls quivered as if recoiling from touch. The silence deepened. At the far end, a breach gaped open where hull should have been sealed. No jagged tear. No explosion. Something had parted the metal clean, like lips opening. Beyond it lay black stone. The asteroid the freighter had been clamped against, and a chasm. It stretched downward into infinite dark. No ladders. No scaffolding. Just a throat carved into the asteroid, ribbed with spirals of alien geometry. Lines intersected, fractal, impossibly precise, impossible to follow. My vision stuttered when I tried. The shapes shifted when I looked too long, curving inward, outward, both at once. Symbols ran down the stone walls, etched deep. Spirals, circles, eye-shapes repeating until my head spun. I closed my eyes, but they didn't go away. They burned behind my lids, searing like afterimages. I stumbled forward until I stood at the lip. The blackness below wasn't empty. It moved. Something shifted in the deep. Not sound, not sight. Just the pressure of awareness. Immense. Watching. The hair on my neck prickled until it hurt. My stomach iced over. My light didn't reach far enough. Nothing would. But I knew it was there, coiled at the bottom. Waiting. My comms hissed. I jolted, almost spilling forward into the abyss. The voice that came wasn't Sparks. Not Reyes. It was mine. Distorted, cracked, lagging half a beat behind my thoughts. You already belong to it. The words dug in. Too precise to be hallucination. Too cruel to be coincidence. I gasped, hand clamped over my visor as though I could block the sound. The static thickened, bleeding into laughter. My laughter, warped and low, filling my ears until I couldn't tell if it was in the channel or in my skull. The walls pulsed brighter, veins flaring. The archways flexed, contracting inward, and I understood. This wasn't a wreck. This wasn't a freighter anymore. It was a mouth. I had walked through teeth disguised as corridors, down a tongue paved with frost into a throat dressed as a bay. The ship wasn't dead. It was feeding. I staggered back from the chasm, but the deck trembled beneath my boots as if drawing me closer. A gust of warm, wet air rose from the abyss, coating my visor in condensation. The heartbeat in the walls grew louder, faster. I leaned against the bulkhead, but it shuddered like flesh beneath my palm. My breath came ragged, shallow, for the first time since we boarded. I stopped pretending we could still win. The only thought left was escape. But even as it sparked in me, I knew escape wasn't mine to decide, because the mouth had already closed and I was inside. The deeper I went, the more the ship vibrated. It wasn't sound, not in the way engines hum or girders shift. This was lower, bone deep, a frequency below hearing that lived in the marrow, rattling teeth against skull. My visor's HUD flickered, and for a moment the numbers weren't numbers. They were memories. Not mine at first. Just flashes, corridors I'd never walked, faces I didn't know, laughter in languages my throat could never form. Then sharper, closer, my daughter's face. Not how she looked when I left her. Younger, smiling, then older, eyes hollow. Her last breath caught in a hospital bed that should have been years away from this moment. A memory I had buried under layers of work, under duty, now unearthed like a corpse dragged back to daylight. My legs faltered. I pressed my palm against the wall. It pulsed beneath me, soft, pliant, breathing. The hum wasn't just pressure, it was rewriting me. I tore my hand back, panting, but it was already inside. My HUD replayed her laughter again, looping too long, pitching too high until it became a cry. The signal wasn't sound. It was thought. It burrowed where memory lived. I stumbled into a chamber. My light caught the edges of consoles, old terminals still flickering. Their screens bled with static. Words formed, broke apart, reformed. The logs weren't logs anymore. They were voices, layered, overlapping, devouring one another in chorus. It calls through memory. It eats what we remember, until we are nothing but it. I staggered back, tripping over something brittle. My beam landed on the floor. Bones, piled at the chamber's center, not scattered, arranged, spiraled outward from a black core, each fused with shards of metal. Ribs soldered to circuitry, vertebrae threaded with cabling, skulls pierced by rods of steel. The arrangement was deliberate. Ritual, not accident. My breath fogged the visor. My chest locked tight. I forced my light upward. At the heart of the spiral sat a console. It wasn't shipboard. The design was alien. Smooth curves where no human hand would have chosen them. Sharp angles that hurt the eye. Symbols carved deep into its surface. It pulsed with faint light. My HUD flickered, and the symbols shifted, reconfiguring, sliding into words I knew. One word. Open. I felt my hand rising before I realized it. The muscles weren't mine anymore. Fingers stretched forward, trembling, reaching as though I'd been waiting to touch it my whole life. I screamed inside the helmet, but the sound never left my throat. My body betrayed me. The console pulsed brighter, recognition in its glow. And then it whispered. Her name. My daughter's name. Spoken in my own voice, but softer, tender, the way I hadn't said it in years. It scraped my heart raw. I froze, hand hovering above the surface. My whole body shook. Behind me, the wall exhaled, a hot, wet breath pressed against my back, fogging my visor from the outside. Slow, patient. The wall began to breathe. I don't know how long I wandered after that. Hours, days, a week. Maybe a minute stretched too thin. The ship devoured time the way it devoured everything else. Without hunger, without effort. Just the inevitability of gravity pulling stone into abyss. The corridors reset when I turned. Every path folded back into itself. I'd take 7 steps, turn left, and find the same junction waiting. Sometimes the frost on the floor bore my footprints. Sometimes it didn't, and they were always with me. Rhea's alive again, striding just ahead, her voice sharp but steady. Sparks at my side, joking, laughing, alive in ways that made my heart jolt. For a moment I believed. For a moment I forgot. Then their faces hollowed. Their eyes caved in, collapsing to voids. Their skin sagged into rot, jawlines unhinging, laughter curdling into wet static. I would blink and they'd be whole again. Blink again and they'd collapse into corpses, dragging themselves along beside me with twitching limbs. My HUD stuttered. My oxygen counter flickered backward. Seconds draining into minutes, minutes into hours until the gauge showed more than I'd started with. Then it rewound again. I was suffocating and drowning in air at the same time. I tried to break it. I raised my weapon, pressed it to my thigh, and fired. The pain was real, white hot. My scream filled the helmet. Blood misted inside my suit, freezing as it touched the frost-lined steel. My leg gave out. I collapsed, crawling forward with my arms. I dragged myself to the next corner, panting, each heartbeat louder than the hum in the walls. And when I turned, I was standing again. Whole. No wound. No pain, no blood, as if it had never happened. My throat tore with screaming. The sound scraped raw, breaking until I couldn't tell if it was me or the ship. I slammed my fists against the wall again and again, until cracks spiderwebbed through my visor. The whispers poured through them. I staggered into a control room, terminals glowing faint with sickly light. I collapsed in front of one, hands shaking as I tried to type anything that made sense. My fingers moved faster than thought. The words appeared across the screen, scrolling in my own handwriting. You will walk these halls forever. You will feed it. I hit delete. The words multiplied. I tried again, smashing keys, wiping line after line, but the screen filled faster than I could erase. Dozens of sentences, hundreds, all in my script, all echoing my thought. You will walk these halls forever. You will feed it. I ripped the terminal's casing open, sparks spitting, but the message crawled across the glass even with the machine dead. I stumbled back. The ductwork above me carried my voice. Not a recording, not memory, my voice. Shattered into fragments, looped, overlapping into a choir of myself. Every tone, every word I'd spoken since I'd boarded this ship. 1,000 versions of me whispering in harmony, chanting through the steel. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it only grew louder. My skull rattled. My teeth ached. My blood felt like it was boiling with the pitch, and then it stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the choir. I realized why. Because I wasn't breathing alone anymore. The air in my helmet fogged twice. One plume from me, one from something else. I froze. Behind me, pressed close against the visor, something inhaled. Slow, deep, patient. And I finally understood. The ship hadn't trapped me in a loop. It had made me part of one. I stumbled back into the reactor chamber, my vision smeared with tears and static. I prayed, not to God, not to protocol, but to anything still listening, that I'd see Reyes, even Sparks, in any state. Dead, alive, whole, broken, anything but what I had left behind. For a moment, I thought the prayer was answered. They were there, both of them. Reyes standing near the reactor's glow, Sparks closer to the wall. Their suits torn, their helmets cracked. My heart jolted into my throat. I almost ran to them, almost. Then they moved. Not like people, not like themselves. Their bodies hung hollow, frames filled with something black and wet. Tissue swelled under their skin, flexing where bone should have been. Their limbs jerked too sharp, too sudden, like puppets tugged by an unseen hand. Reyes's head tilted. Her eyes glowed faint blue, vacant yet locked onto me. "Stay," she croaked, her jaw unhinged too far, skin stretching as if her mouth had forgotten its limits. Sparks shifted beside her, reaching out with what used to be an arm. Tendrils flexed where flesh had been, each one twitching with nervous hunger. My chest seized. They weren't them anymore, but they still wore their faces. I backed away, boots slipping in the frost-slick floor. My cutter torch shook in my hands, the flame hissing alive. The orange glow cut across their bodies, reflecting in the vacant blue of their eyes. I should have burned them. Protocol would have demanded it. Mercy would have demanded it. But my hands trembled. My heart wouldn't let me. Not again. Reyes stepped closer, jerking in fits, her limbs cracking at the joints. Sparks followed in perfect sync, their bodies moving as one, marionettes tied to the same alien strings. The reactor behind them pulsed, its black tissue throbbing with their steps. Breathing with them, they spoke together, voices folding into one. "You never left. You never will." The words weren't sound. They vibrated in my chest, in my skull, in my teeth. I raised the torch higher, hands shaking so badly the flame sputtered against the air. "Don't," I whispered. My own voice cracked. "Don't come closer." They didn't listen. Their jaws opened wider, too wide, revealing darkness inside. Not teeth, not tongue, just void. Their bodies twitched in unison, heads snapping side to side like broken dolls. Then they lunged. I stumbled backward, the flame flaring as I swung wildly. The heat licked against Spark's tendrils. They recoiled, shrieking in static bursts that split the air, but not in pain, in mimicry. Sparks' scream was my scream, twisted, delayed. Reyes lunged next, her arms clawing forward, fingers bent backward at impossible angles. I swung again, catching her across the chest. The flame seared black tissue, the smell of burning meat choking through my filters. She didn't stop. She only jerked harder, faster, like the fire had wound her tighter. The reactor throbbed louder, veins glowing brighter with their every movement. The chamber shook. My visor filled with cracks of static, Spark's voice overlaying mine, Rhea's voice becoming mine, until I couldn't tell who was speaking anymore. I screamed and drove the torch into the floor, sparks scattering. It gave me just enough light, just enough distance to stagger back toward the corridor. They followed. Their bodies lurched, dragged, pulled forward by the ship itself. I couldn't burn them. I couldn't kill them, because even hollow, even wrong, they still wore their faces and I still loved them. I ran, my legs carried me blind, tearing through the corridor until the ship itself bent wrong around me. The walls weren't straight anymore. They leaned inward, twisted into angles that mocked geometry, narrowing until I felt them scraping against my shoulders even when they didn't touch. Pipes hissed like lungs. Frost broke beneath my boots, crunching loud enough to draw things I couldn't see. I rounded a corner, lungs burning, shoulders screaming with every pump of my arms, and then I froze, because I was already there. Ahead of me, standing in the middle of the corridor, was myself, my suit, my limp, my face streaked with blood. He raised his weapon. I screamed before I could stop myself, my voice cracking raw. "You're not real!" He fired. The shot tore through my shoulder, spinning me sideways, slamming me into the wall. Pain erupted white hot, the kind of pain that makes you forget who you are, that makes you animal. I collapsed to the frost-slick floor, gasping, vision narrowing to a tunnel. My double approached, weapon lowering in deliberate, steady movements. "Captain," my own voice, not through comms, but through his mouth. Calm, patient. He crouched close, visor inches from mine, barrel pressed against my chest. His eyes were mine, but they weren't. They spiraled inward, black ridges tunneling into infinity, pulling me in. "You brought it with you," he whispered. My breath fogged inside the helmet, blurring his face until it looked like memory. "You opened it." The words hollowed me. I realized then, the ship hadn't chosen Sparks first. It hadn't taken Reyes first. It had chosen me. Long before we docked, long before I even knew what waited here. Maybe the choice had been made the moment I first dreamed of silence in space. Maybe the signal had been inside me long before we ever latched onto this hull. I tried to crawl away, dragging myself across frost, blood smearing behind me in a long red arc. My arm hung useless, fire tearing through bone. I reached for anything, a hatch, a vent, salvation. And then the screens lit up. Every terminal along the corridor flickered awake at once, humming with static. Each one showed my face, not the one bleeding now, not the one gasping on the floor. The faces filled with calm, with spirals burning black in their eyes, with voices whispering in unison. Hundreds of me, hundreds of versions, all watching, all waiting. The static sharpened until I could hear them breathing with me. Every exhale sinking, every inhale drowning mine out. My double knelt, lowering the barrel to my head. "We belong," he said. His voice was mine. His breath was mine. His fate was mine. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I believed him. I pressed my hand against the weapon, felt the cold metal, and I pulled the trigger first. The sound split the corridor. My skull filled with thunder. My vision went white, then black. But the last thing I saw before the dark swallowed me was the screens, and every face on them smiled. The gunshot echoed, and then silence. But when I opened my eyes, I wasn't bleeding on the floor of that corridor. I was standing in the airlock again. The frost under my boots was the same. The air just as stale, biting the inside of my throat. Spark stood in front of me, joking about salvage rights. Rhea's at my side, her posture sharp, her hand already brushing her weapon like always. We hadn't entered yet. My hands trembled so violently I thought the bones might shatter through the gloves. I spun in place, searching for the wound that should have been there, searching for the duplicate, for the wall of faces, for the black spirals in my eyes. Nothing. Just the start again. I screamed. I screamed so loud the comms clipped into static, Spark's laughter cutting off as he turned to stare. Rhea stepped back, eyes narrowing like I'd lost my mind. "We have to leave," I choked. My breath fogged, smearing across the visor. "The ship isn't dead, it's a prison. It feeds, it loops. We've already been here. We've already died." They said nothing. Their silence was worse than denial. It was the silence of a script, a performance already rehearsed. I tried to push past them, back toward the hatch that still stood open to the station's docking clamps. My boot struck frost. The world tilted with hope. If I could just step out, if I could break the loop. The hatch sealed, fast, final, as it always had. The clang of it vibrated through the deck plates, a sound I'd already heard in nightmares that weren't dreams. The red light over the door bled across my visor. I staggered back into the corridor, the others following. My throat tore with sobbing. No, not again, but it was already waiting, the logs. The terminals flickering with warnings written in my hand. The ducks whispering with voices that weren't voices. The reactor pulsing like a black heart. Veins glowing deeper every time I blinked. I pressed both hands to my helmet, nails scraping against the glass. I begged to wake up again, to break through, to let the bullet do what it was supposed to, but the cycle held, and this time I remembered. I remembered every scream, every betrayal, sparks crushed in the ducts, Reyes dragged into the reactor, my own double pressing a gun to my head. I remembered pulling the trigger. I remembered the blood, the spirals, the voices chanting in a choir of myself. All of it still lived inside me, and still I walked forward. Because there was no choice, there never had been. Somewhere deeper inside the ship, my voice was already waiting, calling my name, calling me home. I staggered down the corridor. My light shook, but I didn't need it anymore. I knew the path. I'd walked it. I'd walk it again. The frost underfoot cracked in the rhythm of a heartbeat. The ducks above exhaled. The reactor groaned, louder now, welcoming me back. The ship